So here we begin our discussion of death. What a cheery subject. Aren't you glad you signed up for this course? Actually, I think it's a very valuable course. I've been teaching a course like this for a long time. And we're starting with Epicurus, an ancient philosopher, who wrote in about the 4th century BC as a contemporary of the philosopher Plato. And we're reading the letter to Menoicus, or Menicius, however you want to pronounce it, is fine. And here we begin our discussion of death. We have a lot of associations with that word. We have a lot of experiences that we associate with the general concept of death. And we think about it in different ways. And I think the key to understanding this particular text, this letter, written by this man to his acquaintance, his friend, presumably, is that to some degree I think that Epicurus assumes that people in general are confused about death. They're confused about it. They fear it. They are apprehensive about it. They dread it. They consider it a bad thing, but they're not really sure what it is. And this little text, and really one part of this little text, the third paragraph, which is so important, is an attempt to clarify the issue. That is, when we say that we fear death, or we say that death is a bad thing, or when we say that someone's death is tragedy, or well, what are we really talking about? And what do we mean, or what should we mean when we use the word death? What is its primary meaning, one might say? In this class we will be looking at various meanings of death and effects of death and issues associated with death. But what is the thing itself? What is death? Again, I think you want to read the whole of this short text to get a notion of what what kind of philosopher Epicurus was, and get a notion of his larger philosophy of life, which perhaps I'll do another video on. But let's start right with the most pertinent material. On the first page, in the third paragraph at the bottom, he says, "Accustom yourself to believe that death is nothing to us." So that sounds like practical advice there. Accustom yourself to believe that death is nothing to us. Now, there it looks like he may be sort of taking a pragmatic turn and saying, whatever death is, it's good to believe that it's nothing to us. We'll be better off if we consider it to be nothing, if we don't regard it as anything in relation to us. And that pragmatic or practical advice is, of course, very important to his philosophy, as we see, in terms of his whole philosophy of life and his particular kind of hedonism. But as we read on this paragraph, we realize that his conception of death and what he's trying to clarify for us is not just that it would be good to consider death as nothing to us. That is, there are things that are definitely something to us that we might be better off considering as nothing to us. But I'm not sure that he's saying that about death. Accustom yourself to believe that death is nothing to us, for good and evil imply awareness, and death is the privation of all awareness. Now there is a very important step in his argument, which leads us beyond it would be good to consider death as nothing to us, to, death really is nothing to us. For good and evil imply awareness. That is, for something to be good or bad for us, for us to consider anything good or bad, what that implies, or what we presume, is that we are aware of it. That is, if I say that Christmas is bad for me, then what is logically assumed in that statement is that I am aware of Christmas. That is, if I were not aware of Christmas, it could be neither good nor bad for me, because I wouldn't have any experience of it. For something to be good for me, for something to be bad for me, to have any value one way or another, positive or negative for me, I certainly have to be aware of it. It has to be part of my conscious life. For good and evil imply awareness, and death is the privation of all awareness. If we think about what death is, no matter how mysterious it may be, no matter how much about it we may still fail to understand when we think of it, one thing we can say about it is that it's the end of all awareness. That is, that when we die, we are no longer conscious of anything. And that one of the things we're not conscious of is death itself. That is, death marks a limit of a certain sort. Death is the end of all awareness. It is the moment where awareness, consciousness, perception of any sort stops. So how can something be good or bad for us if we are not conscious of it? That is, we are certainly conscious of the dying process, the process of illness or other experiences that may lead up to death. But that's not death, right? This is the part where I would claim that Epicurus is trying to relieve us of certain confusions we have about death. For instance, we may associate death with the dying process, and we may have good reasons to do so, but strictly speaking, dying is not death. Dying is part of life. Death itself, he seems to be saying, is not part of life, and therefore not something of which we are aware, and therefore something that we do not, strictly speaking, experience. Now, when I turn the camera, all these, you'll see this in repeated videos, it's because I'm checking the time left on the video, because there's a 10-minute time limit on the video function. He continues, therefore, a right understanding, a proper grasp, a proper conception, a good, healthy, true grasp of the matter, a right understanding that death is nothing to us, not just that it should be, but that in fact is nothing to us, that it's not something that's part of our experience, makes the mortality of life enjoyable. That is, the very fact, he's saying that the mortality of life, which is not something we usually think of as being enjoyable, actually can be enjoyable. Not by adding to life an unlimited time, but by taking away the yearning after immortality. That is, I'm not quite sure what he means by that, but he seems to be saying it's not so bad to die. It doesn't entail any pain, any suffering, any negative experiences of any sort. So there's no reason to yearn after immortality. That is, if we yearn after immortality because we fear death, immortality being deathlessness, eternal life, then that's silly, that's stupid actually. There's no reason to, because death itself is not a terrifying, horrible experience. It's not something that we should fear, and therefore immortality or living forever is not something that we should want. The thing that immortality would allow us to avoid, death, is actually not a bad thing. Again, it's neither good nor bad because we're not aware of it. So let's focus a little more on this third paragraph, and in one more video perhaps say a few things about Epicurus's philosophy in general that is reflected in this little letter, and how his conception of death actually fits in with this overall picture of how to live our lives.